Everyone, it's Johnny from Jedel, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm joined by Adele. Adele, thank you so much for joining us. Adele has done incredibly well in her HSC, so I am excited to hear about some of your tips and strategies, as I'm sure a lot of the audience is as well. So, Adele, thank you for being here, and tell us how you're feeling. I mean, it's February into the next year now. What are you up to at the moment?
Well, first, thanks for having me. Really happy to have a chat. So, yeah, I'm taking a gap year. I decided that after 13 years of school, I wanted to have a bit of a break before going into uni. I do know that I do still want to go. I want to go into uni and study. I love learning. I just needed a rest. If you put the effort in, it's a lot of time you spend studying. So I decided I just wanted to relax, actually see my family rather than being locked in my room, hunched over my laptop studying. And I guess, earn a bit of money so that I'm prepared for uni, and I'm going to go traveling, see some family over in Europe in winter. So I think it's really important to relax and de-stress after a lot of stress. I think I'll know by the end of this year definitely what I want to do, rather than waste a year doing a degree that doesn't necessarily interest me. For example, I'm pretty sure I want to do a Bachelor of Law, but I don't know for certain. So I'm going to be doing a bit of part-time reception work for a few solicitors just so I can kind of get my toe in the legal world and work out if that's something that I do want to really fully get into. Yeah, my parents were always very big champions of taking a year off after high school. So I'm listening to them.
That's great. Well, I love the idea of the gap year. I did one myself, and I think it will help you achieve all of those things that you just laid out there. Clarity, well, a little bit of clarity on what you want to do. I don't think you have some epiphany moment on these trips necessarily while you're, partying in EOS. It doesn't necessarily work like that, but it does allow you to unwind, as you say. It's a grueling couple of years, especially the last year in year 12. So it just helps to kind of decompress and have some fun and then come back and think about things fresh. And even if you don't have 100% clarity on what you want to do, like you're saying, you have an inkling that you might want to try law, or perhaps, someone has planted that idea in your head and now you're kind of entertaining it. I think as long as you get the feeling that you want to at least try it, I think that's a good sign to do it. That's my advice. I feel like you intuitively know what you really don't want to do. And I always say, just try and work out what you want to do by figuring out what you don't want to do, because that is a much easier path to achieve that kind of self-awareness. So there's probably a few fields where you're like, I don't want to do X, I don't want to do Y. Maybe it's like, I'm not going to be a doctor, I'm not going to be an engineer. And it's like, okay, you've already ruled out some big ones, which is quite useful.
Exactly my thinking. I did like all humanities subjects for year 12. And so it's like I have the ATAR to get into medicine if I wanted to, but I don't want to. It's like, no, there's a reason I didn't do science or maths in year 12. I know what I like, I know what I'm good at. So yeah, it's definitely good to kind of be able to eliminate some choices because there's so many.
Absolutely. And it can be really overwhelming for students. And I think a lot of students freak out that they don't know what they want to do, even a year or two into their studies. But I think the key thing is that it's absolutely okay to not be sure of what you're doing, or, what you might want to do later, because first of all, there might be many things that you end up doing. So it's not so much about figuring out a precise path that you're going to lock yourself into for life. Fortunately, we're in a position where, a lot of people aren't kind of destined for that one fate. Although, of course, there are professions like vocations, doctors, and often lawyers as well, but not so much lawyers, more doctors and some professions like that where you kind of stick it out for your life, but you're never locked into one thing, right? So I think if you're not sure what you want to do, that's very natural, and you'll probably chop and change a lot anyway. And it's a really fun time of your life, especially now that you're doing a gap year and you're going to work and then you're going to travel. That's super exciting. And it's also great that you've got your parents behind you on that as well. I was just going to ask, was that a key influence there? Do you think if they were pushing you to go to uni, you would have done that? Or do you also have friends, or are there other factors at play there?
I think it definitely is really helpful having supportive parents. My mom went straight to uni and she doesn't regret it, but she grew up in a really small rural town in Victoria and she wanted to get out of there. Like she wanted to see the world and go to the big city, and like she was gone as soon as she finished. I lived like Northern Rivers in New South Wales. It's a gorgeous area and I traveled quite a bit when I was younger, and I don't have the same desire to get out where
Mhm.
I am that she had. My dad, on the other hand, took a gap year and he went traveling everywhere. And he was always saying, like, oh, it should be mandatory for kids to have a gap year. Like, they don't know who they are when they're 18. They can't decide all that
Mm.
in a few months. So yeah, because it is hard watching all your friends move away and go to uni and start this
Mm.
new chapter of your life, and
Mm.
you're not doing that. Like this is obviously still a new part of my life for me. I'm working more and working now in jobs that I actually got an interest in rather than just casual work at, in hospitality or something, which a lot
Mhm.
of kids do as teenagers. I'm reconnecting to my hobbies and my passions, and I'm going to be going traveling, and it's all really new for me. But um, you know, yeah, seeing my friends moving and getting apartments in the city, and pretty much all of them are studying now.
Oh.
It does make you feel a bit left out. And I think if I had parents that were like, "Oh, you've got to go straight to uni," it would make it really quite hard to resist that pressure,
Mm.
because even though I know this is best for me and I'm finally relaxed and happy, like really enjoying where I am, yeah, there is a bit of, FOMO kind
Yeah.
of going, oh, look at what everyone else is doing and maybe I'm making the wrong decision. Like it's
Mm.
hard. I'm really grateful that my parents are supporting my choice to take a break, because yeah, I don't know if I'd be in the same position if they were pushing me to go to uni.
Yeah, no, well said. I think it is really tough when you see, all of your friends doing one thing and you're doing another, but it also shows a level of maturity there, I think, which is, commendable, because it's sounds like you intuitively felt like I need to have a break from uni. And then also you've got your parents behind you and you've got their insights from their life experiences kind of pushing you in that direction as well. So I mean, I'm fully for the gap year. I think you would tend to regret not having a gap year more than the opposite. So I think, yeah, it's definitely tough socially, but I was going to ask how you have adjusted to that, actually, because that's one of the big things, I guess, at your age as well. You want to be, around people, and it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time to be alive. Not so much even time in terms of era, but like it's a good age, right? And that you really feel like anything's possible in the world. Yeah, how are you kind of handling that? Are there any friends of yours that stuck around or that didn't go to uni? Because that obviously does make it trickier. And how are you kind of acclimatized into that new environment?
Yeah, a few of my friends are still going to uni, but they're going to local ones. Because within about an hour from me is like Southern Cross
Mm.
University or Griffith up on the Gold Coast.
Mm.
And so a lot of my friends are still within an hour or so away, which is really nice. I think it's forced me to kind of step outside of my little high school social bubble. I've picked up a few extra shifts just at my local little general store before I got this kind of potential gig. And even just doing that has, I think, helped. Like if I was just lying around at home all day, I think I'd get pretty depressed pretty
Yeah.
easily. Watching all my friends leave and feeling really stuck behind. And so I guess, yeah, working somewhere where there's a real big sense of community and just seeing so many different people through the day is something that has helped, even though I get my little, oh God, I hate customer service moments. It's still, that's a really great way I found to help me feel kind of connected to people. But additionally, I've been getting a bit back into the sports that I enjoy. So my biggest passion is horse riding, and
Mm.
I own my own horses, but I just couldn't spend much time with them last year. at all. I'm enjoying being able to ride more and hopefully start competing again. And as
Wow.
a result, meeting a lot of people that are, similar in age and interests. And like, I always find it easy to talk to people about horses at competition. So that's another way for me. Like, and obviously it doesn't just have to be for horses. You know, everyone has something they're passionate about, whether it's a sport or,
Mm.
a game or something like that. And so I think finding a way to socialize within that passion is a really good way to stay connected in such a time, of my life when
Mm.
your friends, your peers are really important, and feeling connected is really important by, trying to kind of force myself to meet new people and getting out and doing social activities.
That sounds like a wise strategy. That's really good. So let's wind the clock back a bit, and we'll just. I know it sounds like it was. I won't say traumatic, but it was a grueling year, right? Year 12, and you sound like you really put everything into it, just the tone, right? And you've also said more explicitly that it was really hard, but I get a sense that you gave everything to it, which often is why you would be inclined to have a break after it. That's exactly how I felt when I went through it, and I was grateful that I did that. So what kind of pressure, if any, were you putting on yourself going into year 12, but in particular, or even year 11 as well? And how did you kind of deal with that through the year? What was your kind of North Star? Did you have a particular ATAR goal? Did you have a goal in terms of getting into something? Like, what was driving you, and where did that pressure come from?
I guess a little side note, I'd also like to say that year 12 was hard because of studying and the pressures I put on myself. But year 12 was a really hard year for my school and a lot of the schools in my area, because end of February 2022 was the massive floods that affected the Northern Rivers.
Mm.
My school got like, there was half a meter of water all through the school, and we physically couldn't return to class for a month in the
Wow.
middle of year 12. And because all of the communication technology in the area was destroyed by by this natural disaster, we didn't even have online school for that month.
Wow.
Um, we just missed an entire month of year 12 that we didn't get back. Like, we had no physical school, no online school, nothing.
Wow. Because the
Um,
internet wasn't working.
yeah, like, internet in the area was down.
Mm.
Most of my friends, their houses got filled with water and mud and debris, and so we all just had a month off school clearing out our community. It was a really hard time, and hard time emotionally and physically, but then also really hard because the whole time there was this knowledge, what's going to happen with our HSC? Because NESA is notoriously a bit insensitive. They don't really care too much about circumstances, that affect students. They, got a bit of that reputation of being like, oh, well, you can still do your exam, like, suck it up. So we were all kind of freaking out for that month. And then that on top of just coming out of COVID lockdowns, which ruined kind of all of year 11, meant that I had to put in a lot of extra work to catch up. So there was that pressure that made year 12 really tough. But then there was additionally, I am a massive perfectionist, and I put a lot of academic pressure on myself. I don't really know why, because my parents have never been pushy parents or anything like that. I love learning, and I naturally do quite well. And so it just turns into, oh, well, then, I really like when I do well. It makes me feel really good. So I have to do well. I have to be perfect. And that puts a lot of pressure on yourself. Like, I think we are all our own worst enemies. And yeah, definitely that pressure was honestly even harder than the floods, I often told myself I'm not going to be happy unless I get a 99.95, which is, that's a next to impossible with ATAR. Like that's really, really hard. And I didn't quite get it. And yet I did end up being happy with my ATAR anyway. But like I put that pressure on myself for year 11 and 12 was like, yeah, I think that my own pressure that I put on myself was easily what made year 12 the most stressful thing for me. Because yeah, I'm really lucky and have a really supportive family and friends. Like no one was kind of saying, oh, you have to get all A's, we're going to kick you out or something extreme. Like I had no pressures like that. And I guess I didn't necessarily handle that stress too well. I had this like, oh, I want to get this mark. But I was pretty lazy and a big procrastinator for at least half of year 12. Now I very much regret that because that just added to the stress, of course. And it kind of came to a point where I had to go, look, I really want these marks. What do I have to do right now to actually achieve at least somewhere near that? So I had to really just kick myself into gear. I'm lucky because all my teachers were wonderful and taught the content really well. And I've always paid attention in class and made the most out of, face-to-face lessons. And because of that, I did at least know all the content pretty thoroughly without having to, I didn't have to read the textbook myself or something to learn the content. I had great teachers and made the most of that and made sure that I really learned what we were learning in class. And having that as a base of knowledge to fall back onto was really helpful because it was like, okay, probably haven't done as much extracurricular study as I could have, but I know my content. So what can I do to work with that? And that was how I kind of, started pushing myself to get over these pressures was like, like that.
Yeah, no, thanks for elaborating on that. I think I always say action is the best cure for stress, right? So when you're feeling stressed, the inclination, the more stressed you are, is to procrastinate for whatever reason. And the more that you should be doing a particular thing, the more resistance we feel towards doing that. So it's amazing when you just get into a flow of action, at which it sounds like you kind of switched gears at one point. And I think you intuitively have a kind of clock, right? You know when the last possible time is that you can start your run, right? And you get very good at that over time, especially at uni. The same thing happens. You're like, oh, I haven't revised for this subject, but you keep putting it off. And then there's a time, maybe it's 3 or 4 days before the exam. You're like, if I start now, I can just get it covered. So I think, in the context of the HSC year, you also might have had that sense, which a lot of people do as well. But the key is to reduce stress is to just chip away at things, I suppose. But it's always easier said than done. I was someone who usually left it a little bit late and then overstudied towards the end. But, to an extent, it's out of our control. But I get the perfectionism. I get the procrastination as well and the stress that comes with it. And you feel like you can't be doing anything else as well. That's the worst thing, that you'll say no to things and you won't go out because you're like, no, I have to be studying, but you won't actually study anyway. So it's just this void. And so I think everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people can relate to that probably. So anyway, I think it sounds like you kind of figured it out by the end, and well done on your resilience to the flooding. That's obviously horrible to hear. And I do remember obviously hearing about that. And even some of the schools we were speaking to, in terms of Jedel and the platform, were telling us about that. And we're trying to help out. But as you're saying, the internet, we're an online thing. The internet was a big issue. So I'm glad you're able to kind of push forward. And, if it was about a month out, that's obviously a huge disadvantage, but you obviously made a nice comeback and got back into it. So talk to us about some of the study strategies you had, and also maybe just give us an insight, because I always like talking to people like yourself who are just really committed to the process of getting the best mark possible. I think there's no point shying away from that. I think that's a great thing. It's great that some people are like that. And I would love to know, like, what was your routine when you came home from school? And you said, you were always in your room and your parents were supportive of, how much you were studying. So what was this typical study routine day to day? And what was the general approach there with study?
Probably until a little bit after the floods, I really only just did the study required to get assignments done. And like to keep up, because I did two major work subjects, society and culture and extension 2 English. So yeah, I just did the work that was required to keep up to date with what my teachers were asking for my majors, and to get assignments done well and on time. And it probably wasn't until April that I kind of was like, okay, I've just missed a month of school. I'm really stressed out. I'm not doing anything and I'm just getting more and more stressed out. Like I need to do something about this. I think part of why I didn't really do much more than, just what was needed to get assignments done was because I didn't really know how to study for humanities subjects. So I did all humanities. So I did 4 units of English, and then society and culture, ancient history, and legal studies. And those subjects, humanities are all about the human experience and interpreting things. And it's not like maths or science where a lot of the time there is a hard and fast formula. And because of that, I really found it hard to just study. Everyone's saying, oh, just study more. And I always just go, study what? Like, what do I study for these subjects? Yeah, so it was about probably the Easter holidays that I realized, okay, let's actually learn how to study for these subjects then. I can't just keep saying, oh, I don't know how, to excuse my lack of action. Throughout the year, I had kept pretty good notes from in class, but I kind of started for about 2 hours a night, 2 to 4 hours a night, most school days. In around April, was I'd come home and I would type up any notes that I'd written, handwritten, because handwriting practice is so important throughout year 12. You need to have the physical strength to be able to write for 3 hours, in an exam. But at the same time, having books and books full of paper is really messy. I find it's too messy sometimes. My handwriting doesn't make that any easier. My handwriting's pretty bad. So I'd come home and I'd just reread my notes and I'd type them up into a master doc that I had for each subject. Except for advanced English, I had one for each module.
Like each essay draft in it or something like that.
Yeah. And I'd kind of type up the notes I'd done and I'd organize them according to the syllabus dot points. I really found using the syllabus that everyone has access to, it's just on the NESA website. I found that really helped me kind of plan how I was going to study. I'd kind of copy and paste the syllabus into a document, and then I'd type out all the notes that I had and organize them into all the little subheadings. And then I could see where I needed to get more information, areas we hadn't covered as well in class, or maybe just parts we'd entirely kind of skipped. And so then I, do my own research, whether it was finding textbooks or watching YouTube videos. I did actually watch quite a few Jedel videos for Extension 1 English in particular. I found videos like that for Metropolis and Frankenstein really helpful in organizing my thoughts on those texts. And so once I had a huge comprehensive base of notes, which I do wish I'd started earlier. I wish I'd done it throughout the year as I went along, because I had to catch up on a lot of notes first before I could even just be typing up what I'd done that day. And once I had that kind of database, it was then really just making sure I knew the content. But at the same time, like, it's impossible to memorize a whole, huge document. Like, some of them were like over 100 pages of notes. Like, you can't memorize that and use all of that in an exam. That's just too much, and you don't need it all. So I then started making little cheat sheets for each subject, which I'd give myself a page for all of my exams except for advanced. I'd then give myself a page for each module, and I'd come up with an essay plan or a plan of attack. And on those cheat sheets, I would write any quotes I need to remember. For legal, I'd write cases and legislation and all stuff that was really important that I remember. I'd make sure that I learnt, that bit of statute, or I knew the quote really well. And then on the document would just be the quote or whatever it was I needed to remember on its own. Then I started practicing with, I think it's kind of called like the 3-3-3 method, which works really well, especially in the days leading up to an exam, once you have all your notes done and you have a little cheat sheet. And so what that was for the 3 days before one exam, over those 3 days, I would do 3 different practice papers. And on the first day, I choose one practice paper that I was going to do for that day. And the first time I'd sit down and do it, I let myself do it open book. I timed it, only gave myself the time allowed on the paper, but I let myself have my cheat sheet and have my whole textbook right there and let myself read off it and respond. And then I'd finish and I'd take a little break, and then I'd do the exact same paper again. But this time my book wouldn't be right next to me. It would be closed on the chair next to me. And I was only allowed to look at my notes if I really was stuck, like coming up a complete, what do I say? And then I'd take a break, and then I'd do the exact same paper for a third time, to time and everything. But this time I was not allowed to look at my notes, my cheat sheet, nothing. Like, this was as if I was in actual exam conditions. Wouldn't let myself get up and go to the toilet if I needed it. And I act like I was in the exam hall. Then the 2 days before the exam, I do the exact same process, but with a different practice paper. And the day before I do the same process with another practice paper. And I found that was a really effective way of memorizing, especially for advanced English, memorizing my quotes and my essay plans, but also being able to apply it to multiple different papers, and really kind of worked out, could memorize, had a few different essays that I'd written for each module loosely kind of memorized. I'd try and do a practice paper, like the 3 practice papers would be slightly different. They'd have different types of questions, because when you kind of analyze all the past papers that have been done, there are kind of different categories of questions that you can get asked, and they roughly fall into 3 or 4 different sorts of questions, especially like the essay questions. God, I can't remember them now.
Well, yeah, no, you're right. I think I would say there's 3. You get your excerpt or extract questions. They give you a kind of stimulus, or you can get a theme-based question, or they might give you a form-based question, or something that connects to the rubric. So yeah, I think you're spot on there, 3-4 categories.
And I tried to make sure that each paper had one question from each category, so that I was practicing writing an essay for all of my modules and for pretty much every sort of question that they could throw at me. Obviously, the wording's going to be different, but when you really, break the papers down, they ask similar things each year. It's just, slightly different wording. But at the same time, they can only pull the questions from the syllabus or the rubric. So it's not a total shock what comes on the paper if you really kind of analyze what's already been done, what's left on the syllabus, and that way you can really kind of prepare yourself for any sort of question that there's a chance they're going to ask. So those were my biggest that was my real pre-exam ritual that I tried to do for every exam. It worked definitely the best for, the advanced English paper. And like clearly it worked all right because it got me a 9 in the exam. So I also just really, on top of that, really made sure I memorized my essay plans themselves. I found with essays, there are certain parts that you can memorize regardless of what the question is. So, there are some parts of an essay that you can memorize and use regardless of what the essay question is. I think the biggest one is in the essay introduction. When you introduce your text for the first time, my teacher told us that we should always give a brief description of the text, not like a blurb that outlines the story so much as it introduces the characters and the themes and the context, all of which are important parts that the markers are looking at to see that you've understood. So I kind of practiced writing my best little introduction for each text that I did. I got my teachers to read over them and say, this is something, for this little section, I would give that full marks. And then I just really worked on memorizing them, because those sentences, it doesn't matter what the essay question is, whatever it's asking. If you're doing, mod A, the textual conversations, for example, you're always going to have to introduce your text. I did The Tempest and Hagseed. So you're always going to have to say, The Tempest, written by William Shakespeare, give a brief overview. Prospero on an island, and magic represents imprisonment. Like, you're always going to need to talk about that. And that's just a way to save some time in your exams. If you have these sentences memorized, if you get your teachers to look over them and your teachers say, like if this was in an essay and the rest of the essay matched that quality, I'd give that top marks. Then you've got a part of your essay that you're going to score well on, and that you don't have to sit chewing your pencil in the exam trying to come up with. And I think there are a few other parts in your essays that you can do that for. Pretty similar with when you introduce the themes that you'll be talking about. Most texts, they're going to have quite a few different themes, but normally the main 3 or 4, you can work them with any question. That's what I did. I chose the themes that I knew I could work for kind of anything that was asked of me. And I then came up with a sentence that introduced those themes and why they were important. And so I then came up with a list of quotes as well for each of those themes, for each of those texts, and obviously memorize the quotes. But a lot of the time I was able to actually memorize the sentences that I used the quotes in. I really like embedding quotes in sentences. I think it works really well. It shows that you have a real knowledge of the text, even if you don't have a great one. It's kind of a bit of a trick, if you do it well. Obviously, you can't just chuck in one quoted word and hope for the best.
Just define what you mean by embedded quote, because I think people would be interested to know, like, what do you mean by embedded? Is that just normal use of a quote?
I guess the way it was explained to me by my teacher, when you're in year 7 and you're writing an essay and you're going to give a quote that's a literary technique, say her eyes are as blue as the sky, and you're going to be using that quote. The real elementary way of using that quote in the essay would be saying the quote, her eyes were as blue as the sky, is a simile that represents blah, blah, blah. And, at least if that's all you can do on the spot, under pressure, you're still including quotes from the text. You're still showing some knowledge of the text. But to get those band 6 responses and that you have a really thorough understanding, you'd take only parts of the quote and embed it into your sentence. So say, I'm just trying to think of
Yeah,
a
no, I think
direct
you've got it. Yeah,
example.
basically the main way you'd use a quote is as evidence of a technique, and then you're suggesting that later in the sentence when you're talking about that pre-existing quote, you're actually then, instead of using your own words at times, you replacing your own words with a word from the text as well. So there's another kind of quote integrated in the sentence, and it doesn't need a technique attached to it. It's more just replacing what you were going to say, because and it has a certain sophistication by doing that because you're engaging with the text more.
Yes, exactly. I think I got to a point, like, I apologize, I can't, give a direct example with it off the top of my head, but I got to a point where I pretty much only embedded my quotes. I don't think once in the exam did I just write the full quote and then say, this metaphor shows that. And I think it pretty clearly really helped my essays. It gives you that sophistication that markers are looking for if they want to give you a band 6. And the thing is, with those embedded quotes, you can memorize some of those sentences where you embed the quotes. I that's what I did. I basically reused all the essays that I wrote for assignments, through the year, the internal assignments, and I'd look at that, and I'd look at examples of where I'd written a really great sentence that really explored the quote, embedded it really well, and really talked about the themes. And I basically then just memorize all those sentences. Like, they would go onto my cheat sheet of what I need to memorize for this exam. As long as you remember that you do need to be flexible, if you are just memorizing an entire essay and you don't alter it for the question they give you, that's not going to get you good marks. You could have the best embedded quotes in the world, but if you're not addressing the question, you're not going to get a band 6 or even a band 5. And so I'd kind of take the sentences that either had room for me to weave in whatever the essay question was, or that kind of applied quite broadly. Maybe they were just talking about the theme, and I'd then be able to add a sentence after that linked it to the question. And by doing that, I was able to kind of roughly plan out each essay for each module before I even got into the exam hall. And that means that you've got so much more time to plan your approach, to break down, what is this question asking me? Okay, I've got all my content, I've got all my quotes, I've got all my, author, date of publication. So now I just need to work out, where do I fit all my linking sentences and the question into this. And that way, I just kind of write out everything I'd memorized and then just edit it in the example whilst people are still trying to come up with their, how do I wrap up this conclusion? And then I can go, okay, do I need to add a few more links to the question here? Because basically by writing it like that, you just need to come up with your thesis in the exam, your question specific thesis, and otherwise you have your essay ready to go. And that way, I didn't run out of time. I was able to read through my essays once I was finished, and I was confident because I'd had my teachers look at these essay plans, and I'd get them to give me a few different questions, and I'd apply that plan to a few different questions and hand that in, and they'd look at it and say, yeah, this is within this mark, this range. And you can go into the exam knowing that you've got a really good quality base essay. And so long as you can have a thesis that works really well with the question, you've got a top scoring essay ready to go. and it eliminates a lot of stress going into the exam hall. The way I memorize them, if that's something you want to
Yeah,
know,
please. Yeah.
I'd start by just like, it's a long, boring process, but you have to do it if you want to memorize it. For me, I found first just reading it aloud, whatever I needed to memorize. I'd kind of dot point an essay, really, leaving blank spaces for where I'd need to alter it for the question. And at first, I'd just read that aloud. And with my spare hand, I would scribble on a piece of paper whilst reading it aloud, because that's been shown that, like, not even writing what you're reading, just the act of drawing with your hand really helps kind of cement what you're saying into your brain.
Are you drawing like lines that somewhat correlate to what you're saying at all, or you're literally just scribbling while doing it?
Scribbling whilst writing. Just there is science behind it. I'm not totally crazy saying it. It has been shown. I can't tell you where exactly, but if you look it up,
we can put a link to the study.
It
The
does
phony
kind
study.
of,
No.
yeah. No, it did help for me, because you're saying it and simultaneously your brain thinks you're writing it, because you're reading it aloud and pretending that you're writing. I'd do that a few times, and then I'd kind of use the 3-3-3 method a little bit, where I'd just write the essay out, like a direct transcription of what I had written on my doc, and then I'd take a break, and then I'd, maybe close my laptop or put the piece of paper to the side and try writing it out again from memory, and only let myself look if I was really stuck. And then the final time, it would just be trying to completely write it from memory. But I'd let myself read the sheet, put it aside, put a timer on, and then write it. And I'd do that as many times as it took until I could just write that essay from memory. I also, which is a little, again, another bit of a weird thing, I would record it as I was reading it, and then I would play it back on repeat on my phone, through the day. Like, I'd have a headphone in. Sucks having to hear your voice on repeat, like a recorded voice on repeat through the day, but you get pretty used to it. And then it's like listening to music. You listen to a song a few times and you can start kind of singing along to it. And I kind of applied that same thinking to learning my essays. And I'd even play them whilst I was asleep, like have it playing in the background, because there is some research into that, where, if you play a song through the night whilst you're asleep, you'll be able to sing the song in the morning. Whilst it doesn't work quite that easily, it definitely does help, just having those words over and over again for hours at a time. Those were what I used, and I was able to memorize, like, for first paper, able to memorize the common module essay, and then a list of literary techniques for the short answers. And then for paper 2, I was able to memorize a mod A essay, mod B essay, and a rough plan for mod C. And it worked doing it like that. It takes time. I tried to start at least 2 days before the exam with that. I didn't always have that much time, because I hadn't always been onto it. So if I could go back and do things again, I'd definitely start trying to memorize sooner. But yeah, that's how I approached the memorization for those things.
Fantastic. No, I think that they're all really practical tips. I love all those little things, and it's all about trying them out as well. So if you've got an assessment coming up, you can try playing it as you go to sleep and let your brain, because your brain speeds up the memory so you can get more reps in, essentially. I think that's the idea behind it. I always wonder whether the benefit there might be offset by not going into as deep a sleep because you've got this thing playing out loud. But I'm not sure myself about that. I think there's definitely some merit to that. And I know that in sleep, your memory, you kind of do play things in a kind of a much faster speed. So you can do more repetitions. So I love all those little tips, but you go on, you were going to add something else and also give us your kind of final tips and strategies for students listening to this.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think the sleeping, playing the essays back whilst I sleep thing, I need like white noise to sleep, so, or music playing softly or something, so it didn't interrupt my sleep, because I need that kind of sound to be able to sleep in the first place. But of course it might not work for everyone, because the people that need absolute silence, you don't want to be playing something the night before your exam and get no sleep, because it's so important. I think I'll quickly, like, I did have a few tips for Mod C, because Mod
yes,
C,
please. People are always asking
no one
about that.
seems to know how to study for it. And it's painful. You're not going to like it. But the biggest thing is you just need to read and write as much as you can. I love reading and writing anyway, so I definitely had an advantage there. But consuming just as many different types of literature as you can, and even practicing breaking what you read down really quickly into themes, and key messages, really helps. You need to be able to read kind of any little text they give you, whether it might be, to base your creative off of, or whatever it's for. And you just need to practice writing. You need to be able to write creatively and just constantly come up with ideas. And unfortunately, the only way to really get better at creative writing is to just practice. Although my teacher did give me a good little tip, my Extension 1 English teacher, because in Extension 1 there is sort of a version of Mod C a little bit in the paper. You've got the unseen part of the exam there. And he kind of told our class, come up with 2 to 3 characters that are based on people in real life. Like, not even based, they are real people, other than you, your best friend and your neighbor, for example. And make sure they're people that you've seen interact, because it is so hard to come up on the spot with a really fleshed out character. Settings are a little bit easier, especially because whatever prompt they give you often has a bit of an indication of what setting they want, and what sort of story. But characters are really quite, I think, what a lot of people struggle to come up with. And so if you choose, I think I did my best friend and my neighbor, and I've seen them interact before. And I just I'd brainstorm, I'd write down every little detail that I could think of about those 2 people. And then I would practice adding them in to any little story I could. And I'd try and base it on situations that I'd seen them in before, and you're just changing the setting and maybe just slightly changing what they're talking about, because that way you're saving time. You've got your characters, they are well thought out. You know them. You don't have to come up with what someone looks like. You can give a really convincing description because you already know what that person looks like. And every person on the planet is so unique. So choosing your neighbor, your best friend, your mom, your dad to write about, it still is creative, because everyone's got these different features, but you know them so well, you can see that picture really clearly in your head. And it's then you just have to see, okay, what's this prompt or whatever asking me to do, and how can I fit these characters into that setting? And that just saves you a bit of thinking time. That's one less thing you have to think about. And I found that really helped to have enough time to write a fully fledged story, because I already had the characters fledged out. I knew them like the back of my hand. And although it all turned out to be for nothing because my year had a 20-mark creative for Mod C, I did still prepare for in case I needed a reflection. When they're that 10-10 split kind of questions. And I think I found the best way to do that was taking 2 kind of Mod C texts that we looked at in class and just choosing a few really key parts of those. I think I chose 2 poems and the lines that really stuck with me the most. And it was only like 2 lines from each text. And I just made sure I memorized them so that when I wrote a reflection, and I did practice writing a reflection in case it was needed, which it wasn't. Wish I'd known that now. But I found that then, regardless of what short story I wrote and whatever it was about, I could compare and contrast these texts, these Mod C texts that I had excerpts from with whatever I'd written. And it doesn't matter if they could be totally different. You know, what I wrote about was completely different to Kate Tempest's Picture of Vacuum. That was one of the texts that I chose. But some of her lines, I used either similar devices or just completely different, but I could still say, you know, my plan when writing this text was to contrast Kate Tempest's quote, whatever. And I found that worked really well in practice papers, but I never actually used that strategy in the exam. I did have some tips on short answer questions, but
Please.
if you have time.
No, please. If you have time, I make sure everything's been very very practical and juicy for all the students out there. So I'm sure everyone's loving this, and it's great to just hear you say it in such an articulate way. So you go for it. Short answers.
You just really need to know all the literary devices, or all the relatively common literary devices. And literary devices includes the visual devices as well, if it's a visual text. And what I did was I just compiled a huge list of all the techniques that are pretty common, by looking at past papers as well and kind of going, what techniques are used in these texts? You know, similar ones are probably going to pop up in my exam. And I then just made sure I knew the definition of all of those techniques, because there's no point, you know, saying, oh, this text uses juxtaposition if you don't know what juxtaposition is. And so I just made sure I was really familiar with all the texts. And then I did a lot of practice questions, but I didn't quite do it as if I was in the exam. I'd give myself 2 minutes a mark, depending on what mark the question was, and then choose however many techniques were needed for the mark, for the question, which normally about a technique a mark. So say it's a 3-mark question that I'm looking at, I spend 6 minutes and I'd brainstorm 3 different techniques that I could see or read in that text. And I'd then just come up with, okay, so what is that saying? What is this technique saying? What does it mean? And then what's the question? You know, what is the question asking me to do? And so what is this technique doing in relation to that question? Like, how can I answer it with these techniques? And I probably did, like, you know, over a period of time, of course, but it was pretty quick, easy. Just like I would just dot point. I see this technique, this technique, this technique, and then scribble links to this question like this. And I do that. I think I did at least like 50 different little short answers, you know, over a few weeks kind of thing, because that way you just get really quick and really efficient at picking out the most important techniques in the text and talking about it. And the wording of those questions in short answer is really, really important to look at, because how they're worded, you know, they're going to want a response that really answers that question. You could give some amazing techniques, but if it's not really what the question's asking, they're not going to give you many marks. And once you are really good at that, like short answers, I quite enjoy them because it's just reading a few different things, going, I see that, I see that, I see that. What's that saying? What's that saying? What's that saying? This is how it links to the question. And you're relatively guaranteed those marks because they don't really care what technique it is, so long as it's the technique that's actually being used there. And so long as you're then linking it to what they want to know, you know, if it's like, how does the author show melancholy or whatever feelings, you can then kind of go, okay, he uses this metaphor to show this, and that's a guaranteed mark or a guaranteed couple of marks. Because yeah, you can do really quite well in short answer. It's not as subjective as the essay marking. They don't necessarily want heaps of detail, except for those slightly bigger marked questions. If it's a 3-mark question and you give 3 techniques and why they work with the question, you've got 3 marks there. Like that's, you know, a pretty guaranteed 3 marks, so long as they're actual techniques and the author actually uses them. Yeah, and I found that worked really well. In my trial exam, I got 20 out of 20 in the short answer. So doing it like that is what worked for me. Yeah.
Great. No, that's fantastic. And just before we wrap up, I mean, again, it's all been so practical. And yeah, do you have any kind of final remarks, whether it's general advice or, you know, a final kind of departing message?
You all here, manage your time, don't procrastinate. But we all then do it. I did it. Like, I will very freely admit. And so, like, really try and overcome your procrastination. You're probably going to hear me saying this and you go, oh, whatever. Like, I'll be fine. I've done assignments the night before and gotten an A, so it doesn't matter. When it comes to a week before your major work's due, or, you know, a few days before your HSC, then the procrastinating, quickly, stressfully doing something isn't going to be good enough if you want to do really well. So please, for my sake, because I wish I had, please try and master your procrastination now. You've still got time to get on top of it. And other than that, just use all the resources your school gives you. All my teachers were really accommodating in booking little sessions in our free periods to go over what I'd written and give me feedback. So use that if you have teachers that are kind enough to do that for you. And finally, at least a month before your HSC or trials start, add some weights to your pen. My friends and I taped batteries to the ends of our pens so that we were able to write. You know, it hurts at first, but that meant we were able to write quickly and efficiently with a heavy pen. And so then when you get in the exam, a normal pen feels amazing and your hands aren't going to get as sore, because that is probably like one thing I wasn't prepared for as well as I could have been, was how much like hand strength and stamina you need to write for 3 hours. Like, I had 2 3-hour exams, legal studies and ancient history, and you know, the advanced English exams combined 3.5 hours. You need to have the muscle strength to write for that. And so many of us use our devices all the time now. So yeah, it sounds really weird. You're going to get weird looks from a few of your classmates, but put weights on your pens to train your hands for writing, because it's hard work.
Well, that's great advice. And a lot of people do ask me about that, actually. They say, you know, should I do something with the pens? And I say, look, it definitely helps getting light pens to begin with. But if you want to go the extra step, you can always do your practice essays and, you know, a few weeks before your exams, chuck some batteries on and add some weight to it, like you're saying. But otherwise, I suggest there are these. The pens are a funny one, but it is a big factor, because ultimately your whole mark is going to be predicated on what ink is on that page, right? Like what's actually down there. So you do need to think about it. And, we used to obsess about the type of pens, and there was this particular type of pen that we all loved using. It was like wasn't quite a felt tip, but it was like a gel. It was a gel pen.
Yeah, I use gel pens.
Yeah, the gel pens are very nice. You don't want to use I think, what pen you got there? These are like the standard,
the really basic.
Those ones, right? Like these pens are basic.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we're talking pens, then let's not do these ones. You would get those nice gel ones. I think they're like gold plated.
Yeah.
They are. They're these gold or silver ones. Yeah. And they just glide on the page. So make sure you have actually thought about that in advance, because and buy lots of them as well, because the ink runs dry pretty quickly. You don't realize how many words you're writing. It's crazy how many you need, and the last thing you want is to run out of pens, and it still happens to people. So these gel ones, I would go in with like six fresh ones next to each other, and you end up using a few of them.
I in my trial exam towards the end of some of them, like my hand was cramping and I couldn't really write much anymore, not as fast. Like you need to be able to write what you want to say. And it needs to be semi-legible as well. Like the markers need to be able to read it, because if they can't physically read it, they can't mark you. So you need to be able to write at least, it's at least decipherable. And, you need to be able to write, like you need to work out how much you're going to try and say, and make sure that you physically can write that much in the time you're given. And to do that, your hand needs to have a bit of strength to it. Like if you just use your laptop in class all the time, you're going to get cramps, and it can actually become too painful to keep writing, or at least to keep writing at the speed you need to say what you want to say. So I think it's actually a really important part of preparing. It's one less thing to worry about if you know that you can write a lot and it's readable and you can get it quickly. Like it's an important skill that we are kind of losing in the digital age. So I think that's probably like the last thing I want to say is, really practice your handwriting. Like don't overlook the importance of that, because your brain might be firing at 100 miles a minute, but your handwriting, like you could barely carve out the first sentence, and then you're going to run out of time. But in your head, you would have had the most perfect, like well-structured essay that would have gotten you a band 6, but you physically were only able to write a band 5 or a band 4 essay.
No, it's a great point. The little things add up, and you have to think about all these things to give yourself that edge, right? And this isn't even about giving an edge. This is like a fundamental thing to actually writing your exam paper. Do some pen research, guys, and get those weights on there. And but at least make sure you are well practiced at doing handwriting before you go in there at the bare minimum, and make sure you have enough pens. But look, Adel, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and you've been full of wisdom, and I really appreciate that. Very, very eloquent and articulate at getting these points across. So thank you again for coming on, and congratulations.
Thank you. Those are what got me a 98.6 and, 5th in advanced English. So might not work for everyone, but that's how I did it. So I really
no, my pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
And now I'm stumbling.
No.
Just called me articulate, and now I'm stumbling on my words.
Too much pressure. No, you've done a great job. So thanks for that. Congratulations on a great year. Enjoy your gap year, and good luck with everything that is to come thereafter. Until then, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks for watching, and make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed, and we'll be back soon with much more.